This is an interview for the Voces Oral History Project. I am Vinicio Cinta, and I'm going to conduct an interview with Edith Auslander. We're in Tucson, Arizona, and today is March 17, 2017, St. Patrick's Day. Thank you so much for granting us this interview. If at any point you want to take a break and you want to stop the camera, please let me know. And if there's any question that you would like to skip or not answer, please let me know and we'll move on, okay? So we're going to begin talking about your background in journalism. Why did you become a journalist?
I think it's because my mother urged me, and she felt that it was a career choice that I would enjoy. I like to write. So I did put my focus on it when I was in high school and got involved in the newspaper in high school. And it was a natural from there to major in journalism.
Which was here at Arizona?
I was at the University of Arizona.
How was the program? What are your recollections?
It was excellent. Excellent program. Some wonderful professors who had worked in major newspapers across the country. And it was a focus on was print journalism entirely.
So what did you see yourself covering? What was your dream job when you were?
Well, I think the job that I enjoyed the most was covering education.
Did you have any role models in journalism or anybody you admire when you were?
There were very few Latinos at the local paper, very few. And I was well aware that I was one of just a few, and sometimes was given a little hard time for it. But that was, I knew it was going to happen. I realized it. I realized when I was in college. So later on I taught college, and I had an opportunity to recruit Hispanic students for journalism, and that was a very happy situation.
When you say that you were given a hard time, what happened?
Oh, just comments, asides mostly. Let me give you an example. I asked an editor once if he had looked at a proposal I'd given to him, and he said, "Oh, for you, I can do it mañana." It was just an aside, but it was pointed to my heritage, and I saw no use in making an issue of that. One thing I told students as time went on: save your energy for the big fights. You know, if you want to make everything that's done that's abhorrent or not tasteful to Hispanics your issue, then you're going to be labeled as a complainer. When it's big, go for it and put all your energy in that. But don't be a constant complainer about things that aren't going to change. And I tried to follow that philosophy, and I think it made a difference.
So you said you enjoyed covering education. Was that what you were doing for the Daily Star?
I actually started in the social pages, and I got the first job, and I did a variety of stories, and then I did coverage of school districts, and then I chaired or sort of oversaw the work of younger journalists who covered school districts. And then eventually we had a desegregation lawsuit here in the major school district in Tucson, and I was an education reporter, and I got to break it. We had two newspapers, and the judge flipped a coin. The other paper was an afternoon paper, we were a morning paper, as to when he would release his statement, his decision about that lawsuit. And I got the flip of the coin, and so I got to release it the next day in the morning. It's a lawsuit that's still having effect in that school district. It's still being monitored, and we're going back to the 70s, and it's still prevalent. The effects of it, it's still being monitored because there's still issues.
So there are still issues with the discrimination or segregation?
Well, I think what it's doing is making sure there aren't issues, better said. You know, if it's not being watched, it might slip back into other ways. It's still a concern. We still have some inequities or seeming inequities that have to be investigated. And I'm not involved in that anymore, and so I'm speaking from afar. I'm not an expert on the status of the remains of that lawsuit, but I am aware that it's still being monitored.
Okay, so speaking of issues of segregation or inequities, how was the coverage of the Latino community in Tucson back then, when you were getting started in the field?
Well, if you mean the coverage of the Latino community, it wasn't singled out for coverage. Not at first as it is now by some columnists here locally. Ernesto Portillo is a columnist whose father was very involved in journalism, in radio, and he is very instrumental in making sure that Latino community is covered in some of the efforts. And we did have a section for a while, a special section. We've had special sections with the issues about Latinos, but I can't tell you that it's being covered as an entity. I see the paper. I see Ernestito's column, and that's it.
And back then, did the newspaper speak to members of that community? Were they given a voice in the newspaper?
Tell me what you mean by a voice.
Being included,
Because they were Latinos?
Yeah, for example, I don't know the exact situation here in Tucson, but in other cities, for example, newspapers wouldn't include sources from the community, even when covering issues that were relevant to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think they did then. I mean, certainly the lawsuit was an issue, and it was covered very thoroughly. It's not anymore, but and if there are issues related to Latinos, they do now, but specifically to Latinos. But I think Tucson is integrated somewhat, and I think we have made our way into the community to other levels, so we're not distinguishable as a group the way we might have been then. I think we've made strides. Now, does that mean there's equity? I can't say that.
So how many years did you work at the Star?
Oh, I have to go back and figure. I worked at the Star until about 77, and I started at the Star in the early 60s. So I worked in different capacities. I worked in the women's columns, and then I worked in a lot of education columns, and then I worked education, and then I was an assistant editor for coverage of regional areas. And then I left to go to the University of Arizona to teach journalism. And I stayed there till '84.
So the creation of NHJ and all of these things happened
when I was at the university, yes.
So at what point did you become involved?
Oh, right away, because I was at the meeting in California with the California Chicano News Media Association, attended by Jerry Sass of Gannett, when he talked to a group of us about, at the time, the National Association of Black Journalists existed, and Gannett had helped start it, and he talked to a group of us about doing that for the Hispanic journalists, and I was very interested in that. And so I got to be one of the founders. I think there were 15 of us. I don't know who decided we were founders, but it was decided. And then Gannett was really the patron saint of that group, because Gannett provided funds for us to travel to various cities in the United States, a few of us at a time, and talk to the Hispanos who are journalists there in those cities. Would they support such a group? And they were big cities with large populations of Hispanos. We went to New York City, we went to Chicago, we went to Florida, we went to California, we went to, I think, someplace in Colorado, we went to Phoenix. And and it appeared that there would be a large following, and that was determined before it was decided to launch the association, which was done here in Tucson at a meeting.
Okay. So, can you tell me?
As I recall. Now wait, was the first meeting here? I think so.
The first one was here.
Yes, it was. I told you my memory is very foggy about the details.
So you kind of mentioned this, but do you remember? So did you know you were going to be in this group from that meeting in San Diego, or did they reach out to you later?
I don't recall how it came about. I don't recall who asked me to be part of it. And I was asked if I'd like to be, and I said yes. And I don't know who made that decision. I think there were a couple of California Hispanos who were involved with their media group there who helped make that decision, but I'm not sure.
And when you said that that big meeting in California, that was the San Diego conference?
It was a California conference that we went to. Yeah, in San Diego, I think, yeah.
So why did you think this was necessary, a national organization?
Well, to call attention, first of all, to the need for more Hispanic journalists, to be role models for young people. And I got very involved in going to different youth meetings of journalists and talking about that were largely populated by Hispanos and in different parts of the country, and talking about the importance of following through with their careers, of talking to younger people about advantages Hispanos have with the dual cultures and being journalists and doing that recruiting. And Gannett was real big in it. That's why I say Gannett was very responsible. And I went with some Gannett people. I represented Gannett at some meetings of LULAC and other national organizations, again, talking about journalism as a career. So it was my part-time, but it filled my part-time besides my family.
So these talks were sponsored or organized by Gannett?
Yes. They weren't actually the National Association, but they were supported by Gannett. I worked for a joint operating agreement here in Tucson, a paper that was based on the joint operating agreement, which was, permitted two newspapers to join together for economy in the facility and not be determined a monopoly. And one was Gannett and one was a Pulitzer paper, and Gannett was very involved there, so they tapped me sometimes to go to conferences in that relationship, knowing my interest. I also went to the National Association of Black Journalists meetings, recruiting again for diversity, and our journalism department. Several people were very prominent in recruitment. Not everybody, I might say, but a couple of people were, and so, and nobody got in the way of that. That was thought important.
So there was also a recruitment for the journalism program at the school, at the university.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there's a man here in Tucson, Don Carson, who was head of the department, and he was a major recruiter. Way before I came, he was having high school workshops for kids in low-income areas at the university, and it was really a way to attract kids of color to journalism. He was very instrumental. Just something that he felt the need for. So he set the pace at the university.
Okay. Do you remember the circumstances of when Mr. Sass, said that there had to be an organization of Latino journalists?
He didn't say it that way. He said, you should look at what the National Association of Black Journalists is accomplishing with this joint effort association across the country. And you may want to consider that. And Gannett, if you do, Gannett will help you. And he suggested we first do a little reconnaissance out there and find out, these are working journalists who are Hispanos and or students. to find out the interest. Of course, the interest was almost unanimous. It was highly applauded, the idea of forming a national association.
Do you remember any differences in interest between, maybe in the East Coast compared to the interest that was here in the Southwest, or?
I don't. I mean, there may have been, but I don't remember it distinctly. And it also gave them occasion to start talking to the leadership in their newspapers about, it looks like we're going to do this. And it was a prelude to the program. It was really turned out to be, I mean, it was covered by the media. It was turned out to be something of a PR effort, because it became known not only by those who were going to be immediately affected, but others in the field. And there were newspaper companies looking for diversity for their newsroom. That wasn't an original idea anywhere. It was out there, and there was some sense of pressure from that. So here was this organization that was going to muster interest and also bolster those in the field and bring attention to the need for Hispanos in journalism and what they brought.
Okay. Another thing that I wanted to ask about is representation, because in going national, there would be also a need to represent other ethnic or national origin groups like Puerto Rican journalists or Cuban American journalists.
Well,
How did that play out?
That was an interesting situation, and it really was kind of, I remember one evening when we were in New York City, and there were Cubanos there, Puerto Ricanos, there were Mexicanos there, and we got to talking about the difference in accents. And we had a lot of fun with that and repeating the same sentence, all of us in our own ways. But I thought it was good because there was a little bit of, well, I don't know many Mexicanos, or I don't know many Cubanos or something, whatever. And it was sort of getting to know each other and realizing that we were a group, that we were not apart or different just because the origin of our Latinoism was not from the same country.
Did this discussion at any point become contentious, or were there any disagreements?
Not that I recall. But it was a thing. And part of it came from the ear, from hearing the different ways of speaking. Más espacio, just slow down now. Can't follow you. That kind of thing. But I think it was done for the greater good and good-natured, and it was not contentious in any way that I recall. I don't know about others having different experiences, but mine were not contentious.
Another speaking of representation, was there a balance in the participation of women and men in the organization?
What women there were. Women were an obvious minority. And those were working press people. There weren't that many.
And I actually forgot to ask, but when you were working at the Daily Star, how was the visibility of women in the newsroom?
Women were few in the newspaper. Women were few in the journalism department. When I went over, there was one other woman. And I had a sense that probably, I knew the department was coming up for accreditation, and probably it wouldn't hurt to have a Latina on the staff, because there was only one other woman, and she was Anglo, and there were no Latinos on the staff. And so I realized I was playing that part. There are a lot of times in my life I realized that was why I was chosen. When I was chosen for the Arizona Board of Regents, I knew the governor was being pressured to pick a Latino, to pick a Hispanic person, and a woman. And by gosh, there I was. And so he picked me. And there was a business leader in Tucson, who said in the media, was quoted as saying, I hope, he said, I hope she realizes that they picked her only because she's a Latina and a Mexicana. And I was asked how I felt about that. And I said, I feel really good about that because they see the need for somebody like me and what I bring to the table. And I'm no dummy, and I can handle this as well as those who are already there. Because I think you don't fight that, you make it work for you. I don't know how important that is, but I think it works sometimes in a setting like a newsroom or a journalism department.
So that goes with what you said earlier about advising young professionals or students about picking fights. You pick your fights.
Yeah, pick your fights.
There's another thing I wanted to ask about. You mentioned you talk about the skills or the abilities that Latinos and Latinas have as journalists. Can you expand a little bit more?
Well, I think the better word is perspectives. Perspectives that they have for understanding why people, sometimes we do things differently. Sometimes we're taught, I remember there was an issue at the hospital about a woman wanting to bring in a curandera to have her baby. And they were just horrified. And they finally, enough people prevailed to say, she can do that. It's not going to hurt anything. We have medical doctors standing by, and this is what she wants, and this is for her good health. And so they began bringing in routinely, if people asked for it, a curandera or curandero, and there were medical people. They had a liability, I suppose, but standing by, but they recognized that this was something good for the patient. You know? And so we bring different perspectives. We bring different experiences. Certainly a woman who has had to listen to some of this just needling stuff that I told you about, the needling comments, has to figure out how to handle that and make it work for her. And when you're not altogether acceptable, you can use that for the better good instead of putting up your fists and getting offended. I usually went back later to whoever said it and said, I just want you to know that wasn't funny, but in the sum of all things, I just want you to know that I'm a very competent journalist and I don't deserve to wait when other people don't have to wait. Things like that. But I don't do it at the time because I don't have very controlled temper and I don't want to let it go then. Later on, I'll think it out and try to work it out. I will be respected. And I think that's what we were saying. We will be respected. We, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and we will bring prosperity to your paper. People will read you because of us. They will see the types of stories that we're bringing to the table, and it will be very good for your pocketbook. And I think that's how you affect change. Doesn't always work, but the association started, as I recall, and you might confirm it with Frank Sotomayor. Frank was one of the editors at the Los Angeles Times when the Times won the Pulitzer Prize for their Barrios edition, and mostly Hispanos at the Times put that out. And it was early on in National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and so we got to celebrate with them at that first meeting or an early meeting, that great victory.
So they were there?
Yeah, well, they were all members, I think. So ask Frank Sotomayor to tell you what that was like. And it was a matter of timing, and it was something that I think Hispanic journalists across the country appreciated very much.
You know, I forgot about asking, when you were at the Daily Star, those years, you said there were very few Latinos and Latinas in the newsroom. Did you ever get together, or did you?
We did. We formed a group of Well, we called ourselves, what do we call ourselves? I can't recall. I'll have to think about it. We included all minority journalists. Because most of the minority journalists were Latinos, but we included, there was another Latina, Patricia Moran Benton, and she was in the newsroom when I was, and she wasn't part of the group, but she was part of our local group, and she was chairman, as I was, of the local group. And we used to meet at a restaurant downtown, El Charro, once a month, and just talk about issues and talk about how we could help young people, encourage young people to come into newspapering, and issues that we did deal with issues of what appeared in the paper and we found offensive, to see how best we could counter that put some other thoughts in the minds of those who wrote them. And we were alive for a long time. I wish it was a generic name we took. I can't remember what we called it because we didn't want to be one racial group. We had some black journalists and a couple of Asian journalists and eventually maybe a Native American. So we included all of them. And then if anyone wanted to come, they could come. We didn't attract very many who weren't people of color, but we'd have an agenda and we would meet. And we had a local beer distributor who would buy us beer for the meetings. She was very sympathetic to the cause. And she would give us the money to buy the beer so that we could have a refreshment. It was really a joint effort. You don't need to put that in. Don't include that. That was a nice thing she did for us. But there were other people who were egging us on and saying, this is good work, what you're doing. And we had journalists and professors.
Okay, so people from the university were also joining in. Mm-hmm. So when you say that sometimes the coverage or the content was problematic, what types of things, one example?
Well, I think it bothered people that undocumented people were called illegal aliens. And we discussed whether that was an issue that it would matter if we changed it. Did anyone care about that? Just us? And I think that's what it was. I don't think someone else would. It's a negative connotation. But would they take notice? Would it change the way they think? Or the way they're forming their thoughts? I don't know. We didn't think there was much hope for changing it to undocumented people. So, as I recall, we didn't pursue that one. But sometimes there were, and I can't remember a specific incident, use of words that were offensive. And we just tried to affect change. We tried to recruit other people and to affect change. And it went on for several years. The Association of Something Journalists, what did we call ourselves? I don't know why it escapes me, but it was a very thoughtful group and worthwhile. I know what it was. Concerned Media Professionals. Just takes a little while to dig back.
So these predated NAHJ?
Pardon me?
This was well before NAHJ?
No, this was after.
Oh, it was after NAHJ?
After NAHJ, yes.
Oh, okay.
It was after NAHJ. Kind of a result of NAHJ.
Without being necessarily a local chapter, because this was for all journalists?
It was for all journalists.
Okay.
No, this was just a Tucson, Southern Arizona group.
Okay, so going back to NAHJ, when drafting the bylaws, which was another big task that you had as founders, what was the most important issue that you remember? What was something that you were particularly involved in, or?
You know, I can't remember.
Or anything that was maybe more controversial?
I can't remember. It wasn't something that stayed with me. I know there were some active discussions about different elements of the bylaws, but not outside the realm of resolving.
Okay.
Do you have the bylaws? You don't?
No, not with me. I mean, I have a digital copy.
Oh.
I can send it to you.
Could you please?
Oh,
I would
certainly.
love to see it.
Yes. So, let me go back to my.
I think Frank Newton was a very good convener. He was devoted to NHJ, and he was attentive. He was the right man, and I think we got a lot of support early on from the California group, and I think they'd set the pace for us.
Support in the sense of maybe sharing information.
Well, ask Frank Sotomayor when you talk to him, because he was in the California group. He was very instrumental all the way around. But they had worked through some things that were beneficial to us, and I can't, that's my sense, I can't point to anything. But I remember thinking how good it was that that group had already formed, because it helped guide us.
So once NAJ had been created and it was already official and established and incorporated, I'm sorry, how involved were you with the first board or the first few boards of directors?
Well, of course, I went to all the conferences. We had local meetings of members, and we had telephone. But I wasn't in Washington. I think a lot of things revolved around the East Coast office and activities. And I can't say that I was on committees, but I can't say that I was as involved as I was in the forming of the group.
Did you consider becoming an official at any point?
An official?
Running for one of the...
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I had a lot of things going on here in my career that redirected me, and what year did we start? 70?
NHA? 84.
84. Okay. Okay. Now I'm placing it in time better. Okay. 84. My life changed. I left journalism. I was appointed to the Board of Regents of the state universities for 8 years, and that was in addition to my job. That was a part-time thing. So my focus changed, and I'm just telling you that doesn't need to be on here, but it was a local board, and it hadn't had but a couple of women, and it never had a Hispanic, and so I gave a lot of my extra time in the 3 university systems of the state. And that was 84 to 92. So I think I was not as flexible in that period of time.
So the systems is University of Arizona, Arizona State?
And Flagstaff, Northern Arizona University at Flagstaff. And they're the 3 universities that have are overseen by 8 members of the Board of the Regents, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, a student regent, and the governor. And it was challenging, and I guess I did it because I felt, 1, I could learn a lot. I was a little bit intimidated, but 2, sometimes when someone asks you to do something and you're not sure you can do it, this is not for your tape. But they trust you.
Do you want me to stop?
Sure. But they trust you. You go ahead and do it based on their trust. We have a reunion. I'd gone on with my life. People had gone on with their lives. Most had stayed in journalism, but they did other things. And I was very disappointed. But then I hadn't been active for 10 years. And why do I think that people were going to show up? I saw a few, but no. And they're the people that you liked and you worked with. And that was an emotional thing. The work of NAHJ continued, and that's all that's important. And they're a new breed. I hope they're up for the job. I hope it's attracting leaders who can make a difference. See, I don't even know that. And I trust it is. I think it's well grounded. The needs are still there for them, and the needs for recruitment and the needs for monitoring, they're still there.
I was going to move on to that. Have you noticed any changes in the status of Latinos and Latinas in journalism?
Yes. I mean, you can say not any, but you see people advancing. But it's very hard to compare now with then because of what's happened to journalism. I'm print journalism, okay? So I won't even talk about electronics because I don't know that field, and I don't know what it was before, and I don't know what it is now. But print journalism, at least in this town, with the exception of a few papers across this country, is not much. And I hope that communications is still attracting lots of people of color because of the perspectives, because what they bring, because of their sensitivities, all the things that matter to us when we formed groups before. I hope that's the case. But I don't know what they're doing with it. Are they going into public relations? Are they going into some type of communications with a company? Are they taking it different places? I hope so. So it wasn't a waste. But what has changed is the stature of the print newspaper. It's just not much anymore. You know, I pick it up in the morning and I think, but I keep taking it. I see others. My husband takes the New York Times electronically, and I see the LA Times online and things like that. But he took the Wall Street Journal for a while, and they're good. But you know, electronic journalism is so on the spot today and now. It's just not a competitor for distributing the news.
And this goes back to the same issue that I don't know how, if you have been keeping up. So you said the last conference you attended was El Paso 10 anniversary.
It was 94, yeah. And I haven't been keeping up with them.
Okay, because I was going to ask, like, what had been the main achievement, or what is there left to do at this point?
I think they did some of what they intended to in making the issue of Hispanic journalists and their importance to the general newspaper field, their importance to the large media companies, and who I think some had, I don't know now, had actually recruited Hispanic journalists. But I don't know the field that I went to. It's not there anymore. The print journalism field that I went to is not there anymore. It's
because of the economic
because of the movement of advertisers to other ways to promote their goods. You know, the circulations have dropped dramatically. The advertisers have dropped the circulations. People don't read the paper. Over the years, we had 2 daily papers, which was unusual, and we have one that's very small and doesn't deal much with national and international news, local news. Anyway, so it's hard to compare the two fields of journalism. I still fight to the death for journalism. They tried to eliminate journalism here at this university, and I agreed to be co-chair of the Save Journalism Committee because I thought there's so much to be learned. There's so much. I'd get students who hadn't had any training or appropriate training in the use of the English language and how to write and how to best construct their thoughts on paper. And now, I mean, journalism teaches that, whether it's used for newspaper work or it's used for communication or it's used for public relations or it's used for companies to become executives. You have to know the language.
I know it's kind of a parenthesis, but can you tell me more about the committee and the work you did to save the department?
Well, what we did was get the word out, two of us. And we sent it via all our friends. Now, this is one school of journalism, but we had friends in all countries. I mean, our graduates, it's an old school of journalism. Our graduates have gone lots of places. And we sent out through various means of communication what this department is threatened. And I know for a fact the administration got over 1,000 letters protesting that. And people who put a lot of pressure on people in high places who had started as journalists. And they had a second thought and they saved it. Now, we were chairs, but we were mustering a group of very passionate journalists all over the world. And they let it be known, and they sought assistance in that effort. Save journalism at the U of A. So we didn't really have to do that much except let our people know that this was in the offing and they needed to help stop it. And they did. Didn't tell them what to do. They knew what to do. They knew how to communicate. They knew how to get other people on board. It hurts, and they aren't going to sit on their hands.
Who was the other chair?
He's a wonderful man, much older than I, called Donald Solwedo. He's passed away, but he owned a group of small newspapers in Arizona, and he was a graduate of the U of A too, and a patron.
Okay.
I was just a community person. It was in the early 90s. It was about 93 or 94.
Well, why did you take it upon yourself? Why did you become a chair? Did you what inspired you to do it yourself?
Well, we had regular meetings of local journalists on different issues there. We used to meet for lunch. And Don said, when we decided we needed to do something, we called a meeting, and I'll co-chair, and he looked at me. He said, "You on?" I said, "Yes." So it was just a matter of telling people. That's all we did.
Okay. So now, as we prepare to wrap up, my final question to you would be, from your perspective as somebody in the field in journalism, involving in AHA and in higher education, what should be done to bring more Latinos and Latinas into media? Not to say journalism, but media in general.
Okay. I like the technique, go way back to Don Carson, I mentioned that name to you, that he used to gather high school students for 4 weeks and to get grants from different newspapers and gather them here at the university to spend time in this case, the way things are now. Before it was spend time working on a newspaper and working on the style of a story and so forth. But I think they need to be exposed to a career in media and the importance of the perspectives brought. And they'd be invited to come and spend a couple of weeks on a fellowship. Now, there's an issue about just offering something to one group of people in these United States. So you have to word that carefully, and it would be all young people who are interested. I think, don't quote me on this, you probably just shouldn't put it on there, but we have had champions for our cause who are not people of color, like Jerry Sass, like a man named Don Carson, the former head of the U of A journalism department, who started programs for middle school kids of lower income schools. In this town, that means most of them are kids of color, to court them for journalism. He also was instrumental with the Maynard Institute in bringing to the University of Arizona the editing program for minority journalists. And that associated so many of us with the Maynard Institute. We have had champions who are not themselves people of color join the effort and have made a big difference. And certainly Jerry Sass is one of those champions, and then there were many more well-known newspaper people. So they're not to be forgotten.